Brian, just stay up here for 1 minute. Brian Andresen, come on up. Come on up. I know. Come on up for just for a second. I just got to tell you this. We're the three Logan High boys. Logan High School. Come on up, Brian. I'm going to... Bri, and Al. Call us the three amigos. I don't know. Martin Short. Who are the other two? In high school, we would never have dreamed we would be in an experience like this. Brian graduated, we all graduated Logan High, 75. Brian went up to Utah State and got his MS in science, biology. Brian got it in history. I got it in marriage and family studies. Brian went on to go to Cornell Law School, graduated there, worked for a while, then decided he wanted to get into history and got a degree at University of Illinois, doctorate, studying the Copperheads, Lincoln and the Copperheads. Brian went on to medical school. You'll see, well, he went to University of Utah, went to medical school there, and then did his residency at University of Kansas in anesthesiology. And I went into seminary and institute and finally went into history. But if you would have told us in high school that with us three would be with we didn't even know about the John Whitmer Historical Association at that time, and we've all merged into history. It's just really remarkable. These are just dear, dear friends of mine, and it's just been so delightful over the years to see them in their careers and the path that's here. I mean, how often does this happen? It's just really kind of strange. Brian was I could tell these guys were going to go far. Brian was student body president. Debate. I'm just giving him all sorts of accolades here. Yeah, I was the javelin thrower. Brian here was he knew all the scientific stuff, and he got me through Mr. Kidman's biology class. Brian made a robot. Rodney the robot I think we were in junior high, was it? Maybe before that. And Brian could do anything, so I knew these guys would go on to big things. But anyway, we just love these guys. I'm glad to have them here. All right, we need to talk about Lyman Wight. And I can't see, but Kyle, you're out there somewhere. Kyle said, Alex, could you take a whole hour? And I've never had that opportunity. And so, Kyle, thank you. I'll try to close up at 12:45. But I said, well, I'm going to basically talk about these letters. I was planning on about 20, 25 minutes, but believe me, I've never had a problem probably expanding it. So, Kyle, thank you very, very much. But these are very important correspondence, and that's where we want to go with it. So, this is Wilford Woodruff, actually in the early 1860s, I believe. But he was appointed assistant church historian. They had just finished the Manuscript History of Joseph Smith, and I'm just trying to think. I think it was Willard Richards had died. And George A. Smith, I think, was now the historian, but he recruited Wilford Woodruff to be an assistant church historian, and they couldn't have picked a better one. Anyway, in that capacity, he mentions in this letter that he was called to do that office, and that Brigham Young had commissioned him to do a history of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. So this is what engages him in this correspondence with Lyman Wight, who again is down here in Texas at that time. So this will be part of Brigham Young's history, and he wants to include Quorum in that history. Just show you how that kind of morphed in just a second. So Lyman Wight on the 1st of July, 1857, was then living in Bandera County, I believe it was, asking Wight to provide him with the information so that he could write a sketch of his life. And then Woodruff asked him to address specific questions he included in the letter. I'll show you that right now. And he finally received the letter on the 12th of August, 1856. So it was a pretty quick turnaround. And Lyman took it right to heart. So here's the letter that Wilford writes to, Wilford writes to Lyman Wight. Now this is a copy because he sent the letter off, but it's in this copy book, a letterpress book, And so we have this, at least the text of the original letter that he sent to Lyman Wight down here. So here it is. I'm going to read it because it's probably too small back there in the back. But there it is, Salt Lake City. Dear Brother Lyman Wight, dear sir, I take the liberty of addressing a few lines to you for various reasons. For old acquaintance' sake, and another for the purpose of making a request of you, and upon this subject I will write. First, it is this. During the last year, I've been engaged in writing the history of the church, and especially the history of the 12. I am taking up the Quorum from the commencement, have been trying to write your history, but I cannot do justice to it at all without your assistance. And on the receipt of this, I wish you would write a sketch of your life and forward it to me to this city. Name your lineage of your forefathers, that's key to Woodruff, as far back as you can get, with anything you know about them. And unfortunately, he only wrote about his parents. And where you was born and when, what your religion was before you embraced the gospel, where you was baptized. They always say was versus were, but where you was baptized, and by who, and all your ordinations, and by whom ordained, an outline of all your missions. And I can't even count them all. There's so many. He's always on the road. Was you not in the War of 1812? Everybody talks about that. I'm going to show you what he says about that. What offices have you ever held in the church or state? And he's going to talk a little bit about his military commissions because he becomes heavily involved in the militia. I want you to give me a particular of your conversation with General Wilson the night you was taken prisoner when he wanted you to betray Joseph. That was an important time with you, and for that deed alone you shall have salvation. I thought that was an interesting comment, but this is the experience when they're arrested and they're taken. They're at did it turn off? There we go. Down just south of, and most Trey Joseph Smith, and he's 25 men, something like that. I can't remember the exact number. He said, "With whip, so take your shots." I mean, just and be damned. I mean, he was just a man of tremendous courage. But he briefly relates that in the letter. Give me your account of going with Judge Higbee for some 6 or 7 miles to intercept a company of 40 men going, I think, to Jackson County. And this is, of course, during the depredations that took place in October, or late October, early November 1833. And then this is a little harder to understand. He said, who chased you on occasion when you, and I can't get the word, I think he said, jumped a ditch with your horse while the others would not. And any incident of your life that should be preserved as history, please forward to me soon. So he encourages them to get right back. Give my respects to Sister White, that's Harriet. Orange, you know, this is his oldest son. His name is Orange White. Kind of a little oxymoron there, whatever. Orange Lysander White, and any with whom I'm acquainted. We are all well. And then this is struck out. It is general time of peace, health, and plenty. Well, unfortunately, we've just had war declared on us, and Buchanan's army is coming out to Utah. So later on, they must have somebody scratched that out. Anyway, we're all well in this territory at present, never a better prospect for crops. Our eastern mail arrived on the 23rd, being the quickest trip ever made, 23 days from Independence, 1,200 miles. We are informed all hell is boiling over against the Mormons. Parley P. Pratt was murdered in Arkansas. He was shot, lived 2 hours. T.B. Marsh, Thomas B. Marsh, is on the way to this place, wishes to be forgiven and to return to the church again. So he's throwing that in there with a little, why don't you do the same? But Marsh had picked up a group in Nebraska and was on his way to Utah. I wish, Brother White, you would come and pay us a visit. We will all be glad to see you. We built up a beautiful city in the Valley of the Mountains. Our census makes us about 80,000 souls. Well, I checked. The 1860 census of Utah Territory, there's 40,200 and something. So it's about half as what he thought it was. Mormon is a great trouble to all the world as ever. All the 12 are now in this country except Orson Pratt, Ezra Taft Benson, that's my great-great-grandpa, Erastus Snow and John Taylor, who are abroad. Amasa Lyman and C.C. Rich arrived a short time ago from San Bernardino. So they're pulling him in from Southern California because of the conflict, the Utah conflict. And then George A. Smith is in Washington. I hope you'll not fail to write me by the next mail. Will you tell me who baptized William E. McClellan? My family are all well. I have but one son, grown up, 17 years old, named Wilford, a good boy. My father is with me, 80 years old, is able to work about every day. That's impressive. And of course, he baptizes most of his family. I baptized him 20 years ago and brought him to this valley. I find the world is bothered to know what to do with Utah. Brigham, Heber, and Orson Hyde are all well. I remember old times. We have spent many a good day together, and I wish we would spend many more. There's that gentle encouragement. Today as it was when I was with you in the old land in Clay County and milking the cows for Sister White and making brick for Colonel Arthur's house. And we'll talk about that. All the world that will find it is true in the end. We are living in a day, and God is bringing about his purposes, and the devil is trying to. Great things are at the door. I say again, Brother Lyman, come and see us. We will not hurt you, but try to do you all the good we can. Here's the apostles coming in. Elder George A. Smith, Lyman, and C.C. Rich have just come in and send our best respects to Brother Lyman, directed to Great Salt Lake City, Utah. Respectfully yours, Wilford Woodruff. Please include in your history your labors since you left Nauvoo. So there's the letter, and you can see the request. And unfortunately, for our period of time here, White did not include any information about his experiences in Texas. That's where he stops. But the important thing is he did respond. And this is a long letter. It's beautifully, that handwriting is just absolutely fantastic. It's very legible for the most part, but it is quite lengthy, and it's really in two parts. And again, this is in the church archives. It's a letter addressed to Woodruff that includes the first part that includes a few autobiographical sketches and a post. That's kind of the minor part. But then the second part, which is 12 pages, he is an expanded autobiography of his early years, his conversion to Mormon and missionary activities from 1830 until his Texas. In the narrative, he draws heavily from his journal record. Now, this is why this is so important. I have to say, he was a good journal keeper. And it looks like he picks it up after he's joined the church, obviously, because he'll back up and tell us some information about himself in his younger years, which he obviously wasn't keeping a journal. But the importance of this journal has a lot to do with the Community of Christ, or the reorganized, the RLDS back then. So just to let you know, he is keeping a journal through Ohio, Missouri, Illinois, Black River, and down in Texas. And he mentions here in Texas, in this letter, that since he's come to Texas, since he left Nauvoo, he has kept a record of his journal. He has kept a record in his journal every day since leaving Nauvoo. And so he was really driven even more to keep a journal after that. Now, I don't know if you know what happened to that journal, but that journal, as you know, most of the Whiteites, as we'll call them, will come up to Iowa and join the reorganization. Most of them came here, or came there. But the point is, they brought his journals. Now, he's dead by that time. This is the late 50s, early 1860s, Civil War period. And his daughter married, let's see, yeah. So his grandson is Heman Kahneman Smith. Can anybody tell us who that is? He wrote the history, the published history of the RLDS Church. How many volumes is it? Something like 5 volumes, isn't it? Anybody know on that? I've got the first 3. But the point is, Heman Kahneman Smith and Joseph Smith III went through and created the history of the RLDS, and they cite Lyman Wight's journal all the time. He was in Liberty Jail with Joseph Smith, and this is where I first discovered it. They say from Lyman Wight's journal we get this, and then there's this information about Liberty Jail. Well, of course, you know the RLDS Church published their materials up in Lamoni, Iowa, and I believe it was 1907. The Herald Printing Office burned, and Lyman Wight's journals were in there. So those journals are gone. And the only one reference we have to them is we have some other type, loose references, but the RLDS history of the RLDS Church has those key journal entries in there because that journal is gone. The great thing about this letter is that he's citing from his journal. He can give you exact dates on which he leaves Nauvoo, when he comes back, what mission he went on. So it's really, in some ways, an abbreviated, highly abbreviated version of his journal on the day it happened, but he's looking at it and giving us specific dates when he did what. And then he fills in with some other kinds of events in his life. So this is an incredible letter because it has his journal record reference to it. So let me see if we can. So anyway, just to pull this together now. So Wilford Woodruff gets this wonderful letter and history, and that's the letter Lyman Wight writes there. So this is his history here. Okay, so Woodruff takes this and does a preliminary draft. This is Wilford Woodruff's handwriting, so he's trying to write that history, and you can see he's adding things and so on. And finally it comes to, there it is, you can see his handwriting, and he's drawing from this letter, this history of Lyman Wight. And then somebody edits it. We always need good editors. Historians know that. So they edit Wilford Woodruff's his draft there. And then this looks like the final edited version of the entire letter that, again, he breaks it way down, but that's eventually published as the history of Lyman Wight, but it's part of the history of Brigham Young. But there it is, and most of this material is from that letter, much longer letter. So Wilford saw this to the end, to fruition, as he was taking this lengthy letter, kind of summarized it a little more succinctly, and then had some people help him get it all edited. So that's the best history we really had of Lyman Wight, with the exception of the letter itself, which is really much more detailed. So anyway, he fulfilled that obligation, but he's the writer and the author of this. Okay, so the great thing about this, as I mentioned, is Lyman fills us in on some of the details of his life that you don't get anywhere else. And he tells us he's born in Fairfield. We knew that. Herkimer County, New York. This is just west of Utica. Utica's that, I don't know if we have the point. Utica's right over here. But there's this Herkimer County, and there was 10 children. He was number 7. That's about all he gives us on his parents. He doesn't go into the genealogy, even though Woodruff asked for that. And then he says, just briefly, our family moved to Montgomery County, so they're just moving over here. And this is where he says he completes common school. This would be around age 14. And so he was all done, but he loved school so much they let him continue for 2 more years. So he's about 16 before he finally is done with his schooling. But you can see that because he really is a good writer. He's quite educated in many sense of the word, in any sense of the word, period of time. And he mentions that this is really important. He said he was hired, so he's now done, he's 17. He was hired by a man to take the man's place in the New York State Militia during the War of 1812. He served for only 3 months and received a little over $100 in pay. Now that's pretty good, but the point is, everybody knew he was in the War of 1812. Well, guess what he did? All he did was guard a bunch of prisoners from near, I believe it was Syracuse, down to Albany. He was never engaged in any kind of battle. He never really, had any kind of conflict. He was just kind of a guard. And he liked it so much, he signed up for 2 more months, or another month, so he only served about 3 months. But he was considered a veteran of the War of 1812. Well, that kind of plays out because he kind of liked the military aspect of life, but he never really was actually much of a military guy in the war. But in the problems with the Latter-day Saints and the Mormons, he's heavily, he really is going to promote himself in terms of his commissions as an officer and so on. So he got a taste of military life, but he really wasn't, no armed conflict in his early years. So, following his discharge from the militia, he left his family, struck out on his own, and he relocates to Henrietta, Monroe County, New York. This is the county that Rochester is in. In fact, Henrietta is still there today. It's just south of Rochester, where he works for about a year. Doesn't say a whole lot. He's just helping us trace where he was. So now he's right in the area. Of course, Wayne County is right next door. This is where Palmyra is over here. Or is it Ontario? I can't remember. One of the two. Anyway, then he returns to Montgomery County, works for his father for a little bit, and then he said he went up to Upper Canada, so across the border, and he worked in Michigan, and then returns to Henrietta, Monroe County, New York. Now, this is where he marries Harriet Benton. This photo, I think the Community of Christ has this. It's all over the internet, but I think they have this. And they have him having this picture taken in 1841. That's too early, but I'm absolutely convinced this was taken with Harriet. This is the only one we have that I know of. In 1843, he goes for 9 months. He takes his two youngest children and Harriet, and he goes back east, and he preaches the gospel, but he's visiting relatives. Well, he's in New York, and the daguerreotype process is there. So I'm absolutely convinced. I don't think this is Texas. He's too young to look like he was being taken a picture here in Texas. It's definitely while he's on the mission in the east, and I'll briefly mention that. So I date this photo to about 1843. Okay, so they move down here to Allegheny County. And while here, they have the first 2 children born, Orange Lysander White. He will be part of this Texas colony, and he does marry plurally. But the interesting thing about him is he does go to Utah, and he reunites with the church out in Utah. And he lived in Bunkerville, Nevada. You think it's hot in Fredericksburg? Bunkerville is still there, but that's where he settled. He wrote a wonderful memoir. And then the other child, Anna Christine White Smith. Now, she's the one that most of the RLDS come through because, again, her son is Heman Kahneman Smith, who becomes the RLDS church historian with Joseph Smith III. So there's the couple of connections there. Okay, so he finally decides to move, he and Harriet, and they move down here to Warrensville, not too far from Kirtland. And of course, he comes under the influence of Sidney Rigdon, and he joins the Rigdonites. So let's just go there. He's baptized into the disciples of Christ by Sidney Rigdon. A lot of those images there with the red dots are Rigdonite influence there. He's all over the place. And so he does fill Woodruff in by telling a little bit about his religious background. Up to this time, he doesn't really say anything about religion, but he does say that prior to this time, he had been attending the Presbyterian church before he was baptized into the disciples of Christ. So that's the only background he gives Wilford. But again, Harriet seems to have been a Presbyterian there. Oh, I should say at the beginning, his family were Universalists, but that's all he says. Okay, so Lyman and Harriet and their 3 children then moved to the Isaac Morley farm east of Kirtland, where they begin to practice having all things in with other families. White, even in his family, actually lived. We don't get that anywhere else. And soon 8 other families joined the group. And Mark Saker has done a great analysis of some of these families there on the Morley farm. So this is, to me, really fascinating, and he goes into some great detail here. He said that Morley was able to convert 5 families up in Mayfield. That's just a little bit east. And he said, Wight, I want you to go and preside over those families up there and get all things in common up there, and you work with them, and let's have you move up there. So he starts loading up his wagon, and he says, 4 missionaries. This is when I met Pratt and Cowdery and Ziba Ziba Peters, however you want to say it, and who's the last one? Peter Whitmer Jr. He said they came and stopped at his wagon, and they got conversing, and they said, he was so intrigued. Cowdery said, he'd seen an angel, so on and so forth. He said, I called for a meeting that day, and we listened to them. So he might have just come right into the Morley home, because that's where he was staying and had been staying. But now Morley wanted him to go up and take care of these families who had joined their order. And he said, we conversed that day. And then he said, I went up that night to Mayfield, as I was told. And he said, I just could not stop thinking about what I was told. And he said, I really thought that would be the last I'd hear of him. But they stayed around and, of course, had that mass conversion, if we could call it that, in the area of Kirtland. So he's baptized within a couple of weeks. So I don't think he ever moved up there to Mayfield. And he said it was in the Chagrin River. I think we could probably say it was the East Branch. I don't think it was the Chagrin, but maybe it was. And he doesn't mention Harriet, but I'm guessing she also joined. 4 days later, he was confirmed a member of the church. And then 2 days later, he was ordained an elder by Oliver Cowdery. Now, Joseph Smith comes from New York, and of course arrives and has that conference. And Wight said that Wight was asked by Joseph Smith to ordain him and Sidney Rigdon high priest, and then he is ordained a high priest by Joseph Smith that same day. So it was kind of the first time the office of high priest had actually been conferred in that title. And he's the first one, so he's the first high priest, but then Joseph said, now you got it, you ordain us, which would be appropriate the way Joseph did things. Anyway, and in that revelation, the revelation that followed that conference, he was appointed to serve a mission to Missouri with John Correll as his companion, and so they take off. They travel to Missouri by way of Detroit and Pontiac. Now again, we have a branch of the Smiths up there, and he's going to go up there for Zion's camp. I think Stephen up there, I believe so, but again, he's been to Michigan before, because that's where he served or worked for a short time. But I think that might be the draw. But they go up by way of Detroit and Pontiac. And then upon their arrival in Missouri, which was August 13th, he's got the exact date. He knows it because he's looking at his journal. They arrived, and the church was assembled at that time. Those elders who had come were assembled on the property of Joshua Lewis. So you can go there, approximate site today. If we were there, we've gone on some tours. But it's 35th Street and Highland in western Jackson County, and this will eventually become part of the Whitmer settlement. So this is where he says they came up the Blue River, and then went overland. This is how they ended up in Joshua Lewis. Now Joshua Lewis is one of the first converts made by the missionaries to the Lamanites, and this is where the missionaries to the Lamanites stay after they're kicked out of Indian territory. Sadly for Joshua Lewis, they stayed active in the church, but they went into Clay County, and Joshua Lewis died up there. But there's Lewis descendants that are in the church today. Wight established a home in the Prairie Settlement. So he's there at the Joshua Lewis site, but Partridge purchases some property. I think I got it here. So he's now going somewhere in one of these quadrants or whatever, sections. He's living down in the Prairie Settlement. That is the border of the United States right there, that organized territory. So it's on the extreme end of Jackson County and, of course, the end line of the United States and Indian Territory. So he's going to live there for a while. All right, so he spends, look at this, he's gone, almost 6 months, 5-6 months, served a mission in the East, spending most of his time in Cincinnati, Ohio, where he establishes a branch of 100 members, and his most famous converts are the Higbees, Elias Higbee. And of course, Higbee's sons are the two that are going to be bitter apostates to Joseph Smith. But that's going to be Judge Elias Higbee. He's the judge of Caldwell County. He'll die in Nauvoo. And then his two sons later turn against Joseph Smith. When he gets back, he decides to go now to live in the Whitmer settlement. And so now he's back up there in the property purchased by Partridge. And it's quite a large, it's one of the main, the Whitmers are here, Oliver Cowdery's wife is here, and we know he lived here for a short time. A lot of the Fayette Saints are with the Whitmers. So that's living, and he becomes quite a leader in that settlement. Well, things break down, of course, in Missouri, and you can see his prominence coming now. By July of 1833, the hostilities erupted, and so, of course, there was an agreement that the Latter-day Saints would leave, and Lyman Wight is one of those who agreed to that agreement. However, they renege on that, and that's okay. In late October, church leaders chose not to leave Jackson County as previously agreed upon. We had hired some attorneys, and one of them is Donovan, the other is Atchison, and Amos Woods. Lost the last name, but the last one. But nonetheless, they kind of encouraged us to seek redress through the courts. Joseph Smith said, don't go, only those who signed the agreement should go, so on and so forth. Well, when that was learned by the Jackson County citizens, this is when they come after the Mormons. And they really go after those settlements. Of course, Independence, the tar and feather Partridge and destroy the Evening and Morning Star press and offices. But they really go after those settlements out there. And this is where Lyman Wight starts his little military career with the Mormons. And he really emerges as this militia or military leader and defender of the church. And but anyway, as you maybe know the story, just summarizing, they take Mormon prisoners and put them in the jail in Independence, and he marches there. And of course, by that time, things have broken down, and they have to surrender, and were forced to evacuate the county permanently. But during the Mormon evacuation, Jackson vigilantes made several attempts to try to find this guy. And he said, I rode for 60 miles evading them, and trying to evade them. And meanwhile, that left Harriet with their children trying to make her way out of Jackson County. She probably went to one of the landings. Well, she did go to one of the landings, made her way across with the family. They only had a rug for shelter that she was able to use to kind of cover the family on the banks of the Missouri. But that's where he finds her. And Wight had some connections with Michael Arthur. And Michael Arthur is a businessman, slave owner over there in Clay County. And this is where he was able to find property or find security for his family and had temporary lodging there. So it's during the height of this expulsion that their third child, Lyman Lehi Wight, is born. And it was under very, very primitive circumstances. But nonetheless, he does find refuge, finds a place to stay on the Wight property, or on the Arthur property. Arthur, like I said, I think he had 19 slaves. He was quite well to do for that period of time, and he wanted to help the Mormons. He quickly gets called a Jack Mormon. This is a term used to describe people who were favorable to the Mormons, who were kind to the Mormons. They were Jack Mormons, and he was considered a Jack Mormon, but he really liked the Mormons, and particularly Wight, and allowed him to live on his property and actually build a cabin. But nonetheless, Wight and Parley P. Pratt are chosen under these tough circumstances to go back to tell Joseph Smith what's happened. And during that time, once he gets back there, this is when Joseph Smith gets, in our revelation in section 103, and that's the revelation to call up Zion's camp. I don't know what that is in RLDS. I should have looked that up. But the revelation also informed Wight and Pratt to recruit men for the camp of Israel. And so they go on a kind of a short-term Pennsylvania, New York recruitment exercise to get men to come. So they do assemble in Kirtland, and Wight decides to go with Hiram Smith in a small, just those two, to travel to Pontiac, Michigan, to get a group of men and families who could go to Missouri. from that region. They'll only have, I know Andrea Radke Moss has done a nice thing on women in the Zion's camp, and that they took some family members up there. But nonetheless, they recruit a few men, and in early June, their company joins up with Zion's camp at the All Red settlement. So they come up here to recruit. They don't get more than 20, I don't believe, but they come down here, and the All Red settlement was on the Salt River, and today it's underwater, unfortunately, but that's where they united, both groups, and then marched to Missouri. And of course, by the time they get there, things have deteriorated, and Joseph has to kind of back off. I won't go into the experiences there, but just a few years ago, working with Rick Turley and Ron Romig, and these two wonderful attorneys from John and Kip Craig from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and some of you are probably there for this. We dedicated this monument on the Michael Arthur property. This is where Zion's camp comes and is discharged, and White is the guy who discharges them. And so we put up this marker, this monument. It's a replica of the Three Witnesses Monument in Richmond in terms of structure. And we have 4 panels on there. Michael Arthur's friendship to the saints, the testimony of the 8 witnesses, because Christian and Peter Whitmer die in Missouri, and they're buried on this property. This is the old cemetery property for the Arthur family, and we know they're in here, we just haven't found them. And then Zion's camp is disbanded here, and again, Lyman Wight did the disbanding, and then the Missouri Presidency and High Council are organized here, and I should have I got the same pants on. Should have worn my blue blazer and red tie. Anyway, it's a wonderful day, wonderful ceremony, and this is all made possible. The church now takes care of this property. It's just a wonderful commemoration. Well, so we organized the Missouri Presidency and the High Council. White's chosen, and then along with Woodruff, Wilford Woodruff's not married, so he's going to stay in Zion. By the way, he brought Zelf's thigh bone. Zelf's probably buried in that cemetery as well. Little joke, you'll get that later. But anyway, White strikes a contract with along with Wilford Woodruff, White strikes a contract for Michael Arthur to make 100,000 bricks for the construction of Arthur's new home. So this is when Wilford Woodruff stays down there. And remember in that letter, he said, Wilford Woodruff said, why don't you tell a little bit about this is when Wilford meets him, and how pleasant it was to make all those bricks. And so he asked him about that, and he, of course, mentions it. Now, the interesting thing is, about 20 years ago, I was with Max Parkin, who's a great historian, worked on Joseph Smith papers with me, and we were the initial team on that, and he took me back there, and the guy who owned the home at the time, or the property, we asked him, did you remember where the Michael Arthur home was? He said, yeah, I got a couple bricks from it. And so we said, can we have some? And there's my Michael Arthur, Lyman Wight, Wilford Woodruff brick. And if my kids throw that away, I'm going to take them out of my will, or come visit them from the spirit world. But that's my Michael Arthur, Wilford Wood, Lyman Wight brick. And that house stood until the 70s, almost the 70s. So I don't know if there's any old timers who saw that, but that 100,000 brick. Well, he stays there for a little while. The main nucleus of Mormon activity is the Michael Arthur farm, and that's where they meet for their conferences and everything. And then all of a sudden, White decides to go 7 miles east of Liberty, and we have at least 14 settlements, minor in size, not very big, that we can identify as Mormon settlements in Clay County. So I kind of know where that might be about, but nonetheless, they move for a short time. He goes on another mission to New York, then returns to Clay County. He said he preached for a couple of months, and he's taking care of his family, but he's always preaching. And then he travels to Kirtland and spent some time in the Cincinnati area. This is again where he made that branch there with the Higbees. And he goes across the Ohio River, and he says he preached in northern Kentucky. So he's building up branches. And again, all this material is coming from this letter. We would not pick this up any other place. So he arrives in Kirtland and spends the next 6 weeks attending the School of the Elders. Um, and this is where he has the washing and anointings and so on. Then he went south to raise money for Joseph Smith and comes back, so he's gone for a month. I mean, he is so detailed in his travels here. And then on 1st of March, Levi Lamoni White is born. And unfortunately, he was on that trip that raised money, but he was not privy to the birth. And then he decides to go visit his mother. His father has died in 1830, so he takes a quick trip to Allegheny, New York, Allegheny County, and visits her. Again, all of this is from this letter. So he participates in the Kirtland dedication and assisted in administering the Kirtland endowment during the first part of April. And then he gets back, and this is where he really takes a prominent role in Clay County, in northern Missouri. So he returns to Clay County, and again, by this time we've made an agreement. We're going to go into unoccupied portions of Ray County or unincorporated Ray County, and we've already made purchases of the region now, what will be Caldwell County, and he assisted in that. And he serves a short-term mission with Charles C. Rich, who is also settled up there, do a quick trip over to Illinois, comes back home, and then he moves to far west where he's busily engaged in helping church members settle in Caldwell County. Now, he's one of those who got mad at Phelps and, who's the other one? John Whitmer for selling property and then pocketing some of the money for their own livelihood. He was opposed to that, and maybe justifiably so. But the point is, he's starting to have this prominence. His prominence keeps continuing to get larger. So he serves a short-term mission again with Charles C. Rich, but he missed the groundbreaking of the Far West Temple site on the 4th of July. And then he comes back because in 1837 we have a large influx of saints from the east, and Baugh signed in the December of 1836. Baugh signed the bill passing the creation of Caldwell County and Daviess County. So now we can have our own state militia officers, county militia officers, and he's elected colonel in the Caldwell County Militia. And I'm sure he promoted his War of 1812 experience and, of course, his Jackson County experience when in defending the saints. He has the highest rank. He's a colonel, but it's just below brigadier general and major general, and it's signed by Boggs. And I thought I've seen that, but I couldn't find it. But nonetheless, this is when he breaks out. And he'll move up to Daviess County. It looks like he's the first Latter-day Saint to go up into Daviess County. Now, the general agreement, if we create this county for you, the Mormons ought to confine themselves to Caldwell County. Well, there's no written law. It was just a gentleman's agreement. You can go anywhere you want. But he decides to go up to Daviess County, and there he buys, he purchases from this good old Adam Black a preemption claim, allowing him now to be the one who can have the rights to this property when it comes for sale. And he paid him $750 for it. Now, where he got the money, I'm not sure. Maybe it was just a promissory payment, but nonetheless, he establishes himself up here. And this is approximately where his ferry was. We have this in the Joseph Smith papers. This is where his home was, right here. And again, in the 1970s, Lyman Wight and Ray Matheny at BYU discovered where that home was. And it's a whole long story, but that's where it is. You can't see it very well, but they put a nice orange metal pole and cemented it in so nobody would do anything with it to mark the southeast corner of the Lyman Wight cabin site, number 1. And there I am with that right there, same white pants. Just kidding. I wear them out much faster than that. But anyway. Okay, so while this, of course, Joseph comes up here. He visits on the 19th. He's stopping at that home. He visits Lyman Wight. And, of course, this is where the LDS Church have we adopted this as a revelation. It's the shortest revelation in RD&C. Anyway, it's D&C section 116. I think it's only 37 verses, but it basically says Spring Hill is the site of Adam-on-Diamond. So with that, of course, people are, some of the saints are going to go, wow, this is pretty important. Let's go up there and live up there. And of course, this is an area they can come and settle at this point in time without having to pay any land. They can actually stake out 160 acres and pay for it later. So a lot of the saints coming from the east are going to come up to Davies County and settle. Even though the agreement was we would stay in Caldwell, nothing wrong with, you can go anywhere you want, but that's going to cause problems that are not are part of the Missouri conflict. Well, nonetheless, these people are coming in here. I've calculated we have about 1,500 by the time the Mormon War is over. We have about 1,500 Latter-day Saints, 12 to 1,500 who settle in Davies County. Because of that, Joseph organizes the Nauvoo, or the Adam-on-Diamond stake. And in our almanac, we have Kirtland, the Missouri stake, and Adam-on-Diamond discontinued there. So anyway, he was chosen as a counselor to John Smith, and in the Adam-on-Diamond stake, which was very short-lived because we'll be expelled by November. So we have problems with the elections up there. You probably know all these stories, but Lyman Wight is a major player up here at this point, which again gets really, really muddy. But we have the election day fisticuffs, and of course we want to make sure Adam Black's going to observe the law and establish peace and order. And so they go to his house. Lyman Wight is with Joseph Smith. In fact, Joseph Smith says, Wight, you negotiate with him. I'll stay on my horse. And Adam Black finally wants to see Joseph Smith, but the point is, Joseph Smith asked Wight to do this agreement. He signs it, and then later he said he signed under duress, and he presses charges against Lyman Wight and Joseph Smith. That hearing, they did have a hearing, but it was postponed, and by that time, Wight's in jail with Joseph Smith. Anyway, this is when the Mormon defenders now, later in the month, we converge on the leading anti-Mormons up there in Davies County. I'm not proud of it, but they felt justified in going after the people that were causing the problems. And there was 3 groups that attacked different anti-vigilantes, I guess you'd call them, vigilantes. And Wight was the main leader at Millport. So Joseph Smith, of course, was not present there. He was at Adam-on-Diamond, but he went back to Far West, and in this time, Wight goes, why don't we just go after everybody in Davies County? It's probably one of the blackest times in the church history. They decided to expel all the non-Latter-day Saints out of Davies County, and they had the numbers to do it. And that's going to cause a lot of problems. But nonetheless, they felt justified. In our Doctrine and Covenants, section 134, verse 11, you can see where they would maybe get some of that justification. But nonetheless, that really is a terrible kind of picture. But anyway, during that time, Lyman Wight is building another cabin. And that's the cabin site for right here. You can come off the hill. If you've been to Tower Hill, you can come off the hill here. And that's the cabin that he built. It was not completed, and so the booty, the loot they took from these the people that they forcibly didn't hurt anybody. They just said, you got 24 hours, better get out. And they took the booty and put it in his house, this unfinished home, and that stood for many, many years. This is a photograph of George Edward Anderson in 1907. You can see the house here still there. And then I was here in 1985. I can't believe it's been almost 30 years ago. And you can still see the remnant of that house. The foundation stones, of course, pretty much disheveled here. But again, Lamar Barrett put right over here an orange pole to make sure we knew where, it'd be the southeast corner, I think, where he put that. But today, church has gone in there and just really beautified the area, but that's where it is. You can see that pole still there that they put in the mid-1970s. Okay, we got to hurry. How's my time, Bri? Okay, let me just hurry. So White goes to far west to help the Mormons in their defense operations. He comes right down, and the timing's terrible because they're going to arrest him the next day. He's already there. They don't have to go up to Adam-on-Diamond to get him. He comes down, and this is where he's arrested along with Joseph Smith. You can see it was Rigdon, Pratt, and George Robinson. And the next day they arrest Hiram and Amos Lyman. They'll be in custody now. Of course, this is the main group they're going to charge with problems in Missouri. I'll go quickly here. Lyman Wight will spend time here from December 1st, 1838 till April 6th, 1839. It's a total of 127 days. And that's the earliest photograph we have by Jacob Hicks. He was a Clay County photographer. Great shot. Tried to do a lot on the Liberty Jail, but can't go into that right now. But nonetheless, they're taken to Independence, then over to Richmond for nearly 3 weeks, and then finally confined in Liberty. But it's while he's in Richmond that his son is born, Lamoni Limhi White. Harriet gives birth there. Well, they're in jail, and they finally get released. They have a hearing. I'm just going to have to hurry here. They have a hearing, and it's up in Gallatin where the activities took place, and they're of course ordered to have a change of venue. There's a lot of other reasons they're sending him down to Boone County. That's where University of Missouri is. What's the community? Oh my gosh. Columbia. Yeah, thank you. There we go. We got it right there. And of course, they get over as far as Sheridan County, and of course, the arrangement was to release them, and they made their way to Quincy. He arrives in Quincy, and Joseph appoints him to collect the affidavits for the saints. And Joseph's going to take these back in the fall, and take some of those back to Washington, D.C. to try to seek redress. And he actually rented a home in Quincy. He stays there for quite some time. And then he's going to go and he preaches up in Iowa Territory. And while he's there, he's called to be a counselor to Joseph Smith and Zarahemla Branch before returning to Quincy. And he finally decides to leave Quincy. And for 2 years, he's in that should have been Augusta, Iowa. It's about 20 miles north of Nauvoo. He's there for 14 months and establishes a church, branches there. And then he's appointed trustee of the Nauvoo House Association. And that gets his Black River connection because they need timber now to build that and the temple. And so he's got to come to Nauvoo. He's also ordained a member of the Quorum of the 12. And interestingly enough, he fills the position of David W. Patton. I say there's 3 tough guys in early LDS church history. One is Patton. His nickname was Captain Fear Not. The other, of course, is Porter Rockwell, and then Lyman Wight. These are our 3 tough guys. But I think it's ironic that he replaces the other tough guy in the Quorum of the 12. So he goes on all these missions to get money and to fund the Nauvoo House and, we could say, the Nauvoo Temple. You can see these missions. He does take a break and goes all the way back, as I mentioned, to New York to see his family. This is the last time he sees them, because of course he'll end up in Texas here. And this is when he gets the assignment, him and George Miller, to go up to the Pineries. We had a great discussion of that yesterday with Matt there, and why he goes up there. He actually goes up there twice, and he returns to April conference, and this is when he's there in time for the King Follett sermon and so on. He's added to the Council of 50 just a few days later, but formally admitted on the 3rd of May. He did say the prophet ordained him to the calling of the Council of 50 to lead church members living in Black River to establish a permanent settlement. So this is where he gets he says, I'm going to follow Joseph Smith. This is why he's so adamant, because he believes this was an ordination to go and do this. This is why he's going to transmit keep his loyalty to Joseph Smith, not Brigham Young. Whatever Brigham tells him to do, that's not good enough for him. He's going to do what Joseph said to do. He received his endowment on the 14th of May, and we know he established a temple here, but he probably only had one time in which he received that endowment, so we're not sure what his endowment included. But he serves a mission to promote Joseph Smith's presidential campaign. In Boston, he preached on Bunker Hill. That'd be pretty cool. He comes back, and he gets back just in time for the August meeting in which Brigham Young is sustained as the head of the church. And he sustained him. And Woodruff tells him that. So let me just come back to that. He returns to the Black River settlement, and then, of course, he's going to stay up there until he gets them ready to come down to Texas, because he's not going to divert from that effort. I just mentioned last night when Matt was talking, this is when William W. Phelps titles each member of the Quorum of the 12 and gives him the moniker Wild Ram of the Mountains. It's referring to his time up in the Pineries. Well, and then March of 1845, he embarks with a company of 160 people. Let me just really hurry and tell you, Woodruff got the letter and didn't do a whole lot. And the problem is, he says, well, he finally got the letter. My point is, he wrote this in August of 57, and now it's June of 58. And the reason was, he's just getting the letter is because of Johnston's army had confiscated all of the mail. So it's been all these many months, he didn't even know White wrote back until he gets it. And he says right at the first, your letter just arrived. We got the mail now from the U.S. government, finally gave us our mail back. And he tries to tell them a little bit about the problems in Utah. In a conciliatory tone, Woodruff maintains Brigham Young is entitled to be the head of church by virtue of being the senior member of the 12. He's trying to reason with him. You sustained him. And then initially you backed him and sustained him. All the 12 did. But shortly afterwards you said, I would not turn my hand over to be one of the 12, claiming he had more authority than 11. Now Matt kind of hit on this last night. And the reason was, he's in the Council of 50 now, and he's older than all of the other 11 apostles. So he thinks this new quorum is the more premier quorum than the quorum of the 12. That's why he feels, and Matt told us, and you should pick this up, that the quorum of the 70 seniority was based on age. So this is where I think he gets some confusion and says, I'm above all the 12 because I'm older than them in the Council of 50. So Woodruff reminds White that a June 1831 revelation cautioned him. So he's going back to the original revelation. Let my servant Lyman Wight beware, for Satan desired to sift him as chaff. Then notes the following. When Joseph was taken away, the priest continued with the quorum of the 12. And when you turned your hand against it, Satan had you in his lyre. And like chaff, you were blown away. So he's trying to refer to that verse. He then offers his invitation. Come back again, Brother Lyman, and dwell in Zion, and resume duty enjoined upon you by the Lord, and preach for Zion in meekness, and listen to the counsel of the presidency of the church. And cease to arrogate to yourself authority over the brethren, and with Brigham Young, who ordained you to the apostleship. He was the president of the quorum, and every member of that quorum who Satan did not blow away as chaff has stood with and by him, and have faced every storm with him, as you would have done. In the light of the Spirit had been with you. But he that gathereth not with us scattereth abroad. We're referring to his colony. And then he says this. In your letter, you remind us, and this is the one we've tried to summarize, in Jackson County, in Zion's camp, and in Caldwell, you were called upon to lead the armies of Israel when they were surrounded by their enemies, the hosts of hell. You was at your post then. You was there in the midst of Israel, valiant in the testimony of Jesus and the defense of Israel. But when the tremendous power of a great man, James Buchanan, goaded by the clamor of people, was hurling his legions upon the children of Zion, Utah war, to crush the earth, the priesthood, and when the nerve of every faint-hearted member trembled to the center, and the bloody war cry was unleashed from every corner of Christendom, wipe out Mormonism, where was its old defender? Was he the foremost to defend the innocent, to lift the standard of Zion, to face the monster, fearless and determined to encourage the saints to the dread encounter? Or was he reclining at ease in the sunny plains of the far-famed asylum of Bliss, Texas? He said, we could have used you. Very powerful. Brother Lyman, come home to Zion, mingle in our midst, confess your sin. This should be your sins, and do right, as we and all men have to do. And in order to enjoy the favor of God and the gift of the Holy Ghost and fellowship with the saints, then and not till then will your fire be lit up, so that you can walk in safety and be filled with power, so that the fire of Zion burns in your bosom. And so he's trying to encourage him it's time to come back. And you can understand that being a friend. He really grew close to Lyman Wight at the Arthur property when they worked together for several months to build that home. Anyway, that's my presentation. I went fast. I apologize. Do we have time for, thank you. Do we have some time for questions, Brian? Oh, do it? Well, I kind of see, but I can just see a hand. No, he mentions that. It's just right at the very end. But he's basically just covering his years in which he was in the church. Yeah, because he, again, the problem is he doesn't know. That's why he's writing. Tell me about a little bit about your early experiences. I'm not too interested in you being down there, kind of thing. So it's mainly, I just need to write your history. And so he just mentions that he's down in Texas. So. I'm Bri, thank you. So that's the letter that he's going to write, that he writes after finally reading it, and Lyman Wight died 2 months earlier, so he never read the letter. He died on 31st of March, 1858. So he never got it. Well, his family probably got it, but fortunately we have the copy. So yeah, he never read the encouragement there. So. Any others? Okay, I can't see. Oh, go ahead. Okay, I couldn't quite hear everything, but it sounded like the second anointing to him, that would be the endowment. And we know he got it and received it on March 14th. I have the list of all those who received the anointing or the endowment before the death of Joseph Smith. And of course, the 12 will continue that once the Nauvoo Temple is done. Everyone can come who pays their tithing. But he doesn't say much about it. But he obviously had some understanding of it because he administered some sort of temple ritual down here in Texas. But going through just once probably wouldn't give him a full understanding. I just don't think of what Joseph taught. That answer your question? Yeah. Yeah, that's the only time I know he actually received it. So. Is that Casey? Okay. Well, okay, the question was that when he died or was preparing to leave Texas here and go back to Jackson County. I wish I knew that, Casey. It would kind of make sense. Again, there's trouble brewing with Civil War, and most of these people were Northerners. But it's interesting, after he does die, where do most of them go? They go up to Iowa. In fact, Harriet dies in Iowa. I can't remember where. And again, in the RLDS Church, there are descendants of Lyman Wight. So the Hollies, you all know the Hollies? The Hollies come from the Lyman Wight colony. Didn't the Hollies do the Steamboat Arabia? Yeah. So yeah, that's part of that. They had to be part of the Lyman Wight group. So we have that group coming back. And again, it was only. Joseph did say go down there. When Brigham, after the Quorum of the 12, received the authority to, which we, the Latter-day Saints claim, received the authority to lead the church, Brigham said, you can go down there, but you can only take the colony. He didn't want to have a mass influx of people going down there. They need to complete the temple, and they hoped to do the Nauvoo house. Of course, that didn't happen, but yeah, Brigham was initially supportive of what Joseph had commissioned him to do. But I should tell you, they excommunicated him. I don't know if I put that up there. They excommunicated him in 1848, and Wilford Woodruff said in his letter to him, this letter, the reason we did is we got a pamphlet in which you were very critical of the 12. And so that's when we excommunicated. They kept him on until 1848. But it was that pamphlet that he published that caused them to say, oh, we've lost White. So I think Charles C. Rich replaces him, one of his buddies, if I remember right. Any, okay, right here.
What happened to his polygamous wife?
You know, I'm not the expert on that. I don't know. I don't know if he had any children. I don't even remember. Is Mel here? Isn't Mel speaking to us? Oh, you're kidding. Well, his book is really good. Believe me, on the Mel Johnson. Sorry, boy, I was hoping Mel would be here. He would know right off. I think he had 3 other wives, so 4 total. Yeah, and Lysander, Orange Lysander, had a couple of wives, but he was rebaptized down in Utah. That wasn't a problem because practicing plural marriage out there. So. This letter? Oh, I don't even know where that is. Yeah, I don't know that. I just know Woodruff mentions it. He says the reason you were excommunicated was because of the pamphlet you wrote, being very critical of the 12. That's almost his exact words. I don't know if I have it there. No, I just have the one copy there. Well, they need to come in and do our dinner, and so I'm kind of hungry. But again, it's great to be in this country, this region where Lyman Wight was, and honor him for what he did do and what he tried to do. I think his intentions were always good. But anyway, I just think it's so interesting. I'm so glad we came here. I was looking forward to it because so many times we just don't get around as much as we'd like to. And this has been a wonderful opportunity to be here. So thank you very, very much.